Nordic aliens is these beings. Hypothesis. They are the original human type, and we are chimeras genetically engineered in their image. They are our cosmic relatives, created by the same primordial alien progenitors that created us, but seated on other worlds. They are ancient offshoots of the human race who surpassed the rest of the species. They are Atlantean, Hyperborean survivors who did not devolve like other humans. They are human avatars or proxies for another alien intelligence. They are from a parallel timeline or hidden realm where a superior civilization has developed. They are our time-traveling descendants. In all likelihood, Nordics consist of different groups with different histories. Some could be time travelers from our future, others remnants of an ancient off-planetary superhuman civilization. Both share fourth density characteristics, both possess demiurgic technology, and both seem genetically related. They appear to be part of a transcendent civilization whose cultures are distributed over spatial and temporal geography. These are cultures that mingle with each other across space and time. This civilization stands outside linear time. Mankind is unwittingly caught in a war between hidden superhuman factions who select, train, equip their human agents to participate in that war. Demiurgic technology enables major shifts in the balance between their competing agendas. In this article and the next, I will speculate on the nature, origins, and motivations of these superhuman beings and their human proxies who, in modern times, surreptitiously coexist alongside humanity as a hidden parallel civilization. This will widen our perspective for understanding current and future world events. Nordic aliens brought the Holy Grail to Earth, and what is their purpose? Those among them with the most consistent historical presence are human in appearance, yet far beyond human in their knowledge and abilities. Based on my research, correspondences, and personal experiences, I have come to several conclusions concerning them. There is warring among these beings, indicating they are not all unified. At the very minimum they are polarized into opposing sides, if not split into numerous independent factions. Some factions have a strong fascist orientation. They walk among us pretending to be human. Some are integrated into society and hold strategic positions, whether to influence or simply observe. They are genetically compatible with us, and some of their females have engaged human males for sexual encounters and even long-term relationships. Through interbreeding their genes can enter our gene pool and vice versa. Therefore some human individuals and bloodlines would have more of their DNA than others, and their alien DNA would likely show under analysis to be basically human, albeit rare and unusual. Through genetic manipulation, they can insert alien DNA as a third-party contributor to a developing human fetus, so that the child resembles both human parents while also being somewhat hybridized. Whether artificially hybridized, naturally conceived between human and alien, or fully alien, such a child born and raised in a human family will mostly pass for human, except they will be of a caliber beyond their peers. The greatest heroes of myth and ancient history were popularly viewed as crossbreeds between gods and men. Throughout history, they have selected certain humans, or perhaps their own offspring, hybrids raised in human society, for privileged education, training, and guidance, so that these human proxies can function as vectors for their agenda, be it benevolent or hostile to mankind at large. This may include modern-day contactees and abductees, ancient prophets and magicians, and the founders of mystery schools and secret societies like the Rosicrucians. Note that such secret societies are just larger, more powerful, institutionalized versions of individual contactees, that is, they are both under the guidance of aliens, given privileged knowledge, and charged with a mission fitting the agenda of their alien benefactors. Considering that some of the esoteric knowledge communicated to humans is positively helpful, not all alien influences are selfish. It seems some are genuinely interested in raising humanity's potential in the areas of discernment, chivalry, ethics, and spiritual integrity. They are all secretive and known to lie, even if only by omission, regardless of their spiritual orientation. Benevolent reasons could involve the law of non-interference, complications with timeline dynamics arising from unscrupulous contamination of the past, the need to ensure that privileged and powerful knowledge is entrusted only to vetted parties who will use it responsibly, and self-protection to avoid discovery and persecution. Malevolent reasons could include the hiding of hostile agendas and hoarding of knowledge for leveraging purposes. They are extremely telepathic. They can read thoughts with minute precision, implant thoughts, scan the soul for its level of integrity or weakness, induce hallucinations, manipulate emotions, and steer a person's dreams. The human proxies they train can achieve these skills at a lower power level. They use technology to augment their innate superhuman abilities. This technology is demiurgic, can control time and gravity, affords them invisibility and anti-gravity, and allows them to walk through solid objects, meaning they can inhabit solid mountains in a dimensionally shifted condition, for instance. Their native environment is dimensionally shifted beyond ours, that is, we cannot find their bases through mere physical searching. Like the Grail Castle, which appears only to the chosen, their abode only becomes visible and accessible to us at their choosing. For example, a contactee may be psychically modified to perceive it, or dimensionally shifted to enter it. Like an angel losing its wings, under certain conditions they can lose their abilities and become mortal without the ability to return to their superhuman state, at least not within this lifetime. They get stuck here. If an entire group of theirs undergoes such a fall, they would enter into human history as an already developed and highly advanced culture that gradually undergoes decline upon becoming naturalized members of a primitive planet. The members of their civilization are not all homogeneous in standing or understanding. Composition ranges from a two-tier system of lower retarded ones and higher advanced ones to caste-like systems with many tiers similar to the Indian caste system. The retarded members of their kind are the ones who interact with the most advanced of humans. Why? Maybe because of their evolutionary closeness, and also because such an interaction could be mutually beneficial. Despite their seeming superhuman qualities, those aliens who interact most with select humans may, in fact, be the most flawed of their race. The apex of their leadership extends beyond the physical and semi-physical, into the domain of divine and demonic forces. In the case of positive alien groups and their angelic or spiritual superiors, the relation may not be so much of commanding and obedience, but oracular guidance and respect. The ancient human practice of consulting the oracles, consulting the gods, etc. may be a lower echoing of this relationship. The lower of their kind seem more physical, technological, and tactical, while the higher tiers seem more esoteric, astral, and judiciary.
The problem, however, is that their most fluid ones are not only the creators and users of demiurgic technology, but they are also most involved in human affairs. This means we suffer their errors, which are graver in consequence than any mistake we could commit, just as our errors are more severe than those possible by animals. The consequences of these errors and grave transgressions have cascaded back and forth throughout the timeline. They are now converging toward a nexus point representing the potential for a cataclysmic shift. Alien factions who are responsible for initiating these consequences are likely the same ones who are now involved in the final outcome. A thread of continuity exists between the most ancient and modern of human-alien encounters. The alien disinformation campaign is an effort by one set of such factions to prepare mankind for enthusiastic acceptance of their overt control. Nordic origins and identity. Who are these beings? We can rule out several possibilities. 1. They are not all spirits, demons, angels, or elementals because they can appear in the physical for extended periods of time, leave behind DNA evidence, interbreed with humans, and display an internally consistent assortment of high technology. Anyone with sufficient experience can differentiate between aliens and metaphysical entities. 2. They are not all members of some benevolent galactic federation, since there is warring among their opposing factions and some display fascist tendencies, even within the Nordic typology. Because traces of their presence on Earth go back thousands of years. 3. They are not all hoaxes perpetrated by the shadow government. Nonetheless, the latter may have hoaxed a portion of the space brother fight to hijack the real thing and subdue xenophobia. Examples include Commander Ashtar, a sappy caricature of a Nordic, who is frequently channeled in the New Age community. 4. They are not curious visitors who arrived here only in the 20th century. While lesser alien races may have visited more recently for scientific observation, the Nordics are not among them. 5. They are not all remnants of some secret Nazi space program. It's a non sequitur to say Nazis are responsible for the UFO phenomenon when it was through their cult research and communication with aliens that they achieved that level of technology in the first place. If anything, their advanced remnants were later assimilated into the same confederation of negative factions that have likewise assimilated the modern shadow military. Human evolution underwent jumps so sudden as to be anomalous. As everyone knows, Sumerian myths speak of the Anunnaki who created humans for slave labor, while in the book of Genesis the same Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image." Was it all the work of the superhumans discussed in this article, or were they themselves also the products of genetic engineering? They are our cosmic relatives, created by the same primordial alien progenitors that created us, but seated on other worlds. This is the only viable aspect of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It would explain why they could be from other planets yet share compatible DNA. When intelligent life arises nationally on one planet, develops into a super civilization, and achieves mastery of genetics and space travel, life soon spreads to nearby compatible planets. All carbon-based humanoid aliens share common ancestry, as the odds of two completely independent evolutions producing the same form is infinitesimal. Then one world can discover another and genetically modify it further, despite both being the creations of an even older alien race. What could be their cosmic origins? The nearest candidate is the ancient planet whose remains populate the asteroid belt. Otherwise one would have to look further, toward Alpha Centauri, Sirius, Procyon, Barnard's Star, Arcturus, and Aldebaran. Alienology research points toward Orion and the Pleiades as well, but the stars of those constellations are many hundreds of light years away. Most of their alleged home worlds are less than 100 light years, which, relative to the size of our galaxy, makes them our next-door neighbors. They are ancient offshoots of the human race who surpass the rest of the species. This is along the lines of what PIEKŁA is proposed. If true, the evolutionary branching must have occurred recently, since they look so similar. They could be direct descendants of Cro-Magnon man, who appeared suddenly in Western Europe around 30,000 years ago and had larger brain capacities and better physiques than modern man, matching two characteristics ascribed to Nordic aliens. On the other hand, Cro-Magnons could equally well have been Nordic populations who immigrated to Earth around that time, or simply their initial genetic experiments. Which fits the sudden arrival of the Cro-Magnons and their genetic distance from Africa. They are Atlantean, Hyperborean survivors who did not devolve like other humans. Surviving elite who held on to their knowledge and technology would have later emerged as virtual gods to the rest of the population who degraded to the level of primitives. But did they develop the technology on their own, or was it given to them by aliens? More likely the latter, since the archaeological evidence of ancient advanced civilization is scarce and localized in small pockets around the world, indicating a small elite who, even before the cataclysms, ruled over a more primitive population. If that antediluvian civilization had advanced on its own, it would have taken far longer, been more uniformly advanced throughout, and have left behind more traces. The aliens of today are probably not identically the Atlantean survivors, though the latter could have been their human, hybrid proxies who received assistance and forewarning. Think of Noah being told by the Lord to build an ark, modern contactees and abductees being warned of imminent cataclysm, or the shadow government manically building underground bases due to receiving privileged information from their alien contacts. If nothing else, strong ties exist between Nordic aliens and the descendants of these ancient surviving elite. The Basque, Celtic, and Asian DNA recovered from Peter Cowrey's case suggests as much. Nordics seem interested in people of mixed East, West ancestry, of which a portion traces back to these post-Atlantean bloodlines. Prominent examples of ancient bloodlines include the Basques, Celts, Minoans, and Phoenicians. The latter three consorted with the 18th dynasty of Egypt and consequently the tribe of Levi, who were the only people among the Israelites allowed to operate the Ark of the Covenant. They are human avatars or proxies for another alien intelligence. The DNA evidence from Peter Cowrey's case could equally suggest Nordics were created from us. Some third-party alien race could have collected desirable genetics from humans throughout history and assembled a race of superhumans. In that case, they are either cybernetic creations worn as meat suits by completely foreign alien intelligences, or they are genuinely spirited people who were created as proxies for their non-human masters. These proxies could then interbred with humans to spawn bloodlines functioning as yet another tier of Earthbound proxies. This is something Four speculated on, after discovering that the human-like personality of his Nordic advisor was a front, and that her true mind was far less human and more profoundly complex than it seemed. On the other hand, he also mentioned that these aliens undergo training to step down their consciousness to our level to make interaction possible. Orfeo Angelucci's contacts hinted likewise. The question is whether they are just superhumans who downshift their personalities to our level for interaction, like any adult does when talking to a toddler, or whether they are total fabrications by some monstrous alien intelligence. The latter is attractively conspiratorial, but not really substantiated by the available evidence and anecdotes except in the case of awkward human simulacra such as the Men in Black. Not to mention, if they were created to put a human face on the alien presence, then there shouldn't be so many reports of other alien species like the Greys and Reptilians. They are from a parallel timeline or hidden realm where a superior civilization has developed. What is the nature of their world, and how does it relate to ours? It's not enough to say their world is just a parallel Earth where things advanced more quickly on the technological and evolutionary front. For one, these beings along with ghosts, elementals, demons, etc. have always been able to observe and influence us, but not vice versa. Our two worlds are not equal in terms of fundamental tangibility. Etheric energies play a more visible and active role in their realm. Therefore it's not a simple matter of Nordics inhabiting a parallel 3D physical timeline, rather they seem to inhabit a higher density, as the term is used in the Ra and Cassiopeian material.
Gnostics know our world is an illusion created by the corrupt demiurge. It follows that beyond the borders of our reality exists the real world, or at least something not so hermetically isolated from the greater creation. Could beings from that world be popping into ours, injecting their influences into this petri dish we call reality? They are our time-traveling descendants. Experience proves they can see into the future. It's hard to tell whether this ability comes solely from clairvoyance, mathematical calculation, or hindsight from the future. Probably a combination of all three. Regardless, they are obsessed with the future and how present developments affect it. The delicate manner of their manipulations, the eons over which they carry them out, and the knowing determination inherent in their efficiency suggests their vantage point is outside linear time. The one consistent element in what abductees and contactees are told, is that our world will soon undergo a time of great upheaval. Times of change, especially collective change, are significant choice points on the timeline. They are windows of chaos that spawn many probable futures. Those windows seem to function as apertures allowing the influx of time-traveling influences from the futures they generate. If nothing else, they would be strategic pivot points on the timeline that attract the greatest attention from warring time travelers. Consequently, if aliens like the Nordics are time travelers, then since multiple futures issue from a singular past, they would have to be time travelers from various probable futures engaging in a time war of sorts. Different factions are exerting opposing influences upon the present to reshape the future to their advantage. As we approach the primary nexus point, these probable futures will play a game of musical chairs, with only one future quantum collapsing into the final tangible one. Furthermore, with time travel, the issue of where and when they originated becomes obscured. If they claim to come from Procyon, that could be true, but it might mean Procyon 10,000 years from now after human descendants have long colonized space and achieved time travel as well. Or if ancient astronaut research indicates they genetically modified the human race in their image, it could just as well be those time travelers from Procyon, or wherever, visiting our prehistory and accelerating human evolution to rewrite the timeline in their favor. Then they would be time travelers tweaking the genetics of their ancestors, possibly even interbreeding with them, training some, leasing them powerful technology, all as part of a time war waged over the battlefield of space and time. Alternatively, some malevolent alien faction could do likewise in order to dumb us down so that, when the time of great upheaval occurs, odds are shifted in the favor of a successful deception. Conditions that now allow for the imminent implementation of a global totalitarian system under negative alien control have been under construction for many thousands of years. Religion and scientific materialism will play a large part in that deception, and both play on fundamental human weaknesses genetically programmed into us. Furthermore, subtle timeline nudges in the form of visions and visitations have also greatly altered the landscape of the future. Saul, Joan of Arc, Joseph Smith, and Adolf Hitler come to mind as examples of characters targeted for that purpose. Lastly, for the sake of speculation, if Nordics are time-traveling descendants from our current population, one has to wonder what land today is their ancestral land, assuming they aren't descendants of an alternate Earth that existed prior to the time war that spawned our current timeline. Based on the Nordic or Scandinavian nomenclature assigned to them, one might initially guess Northern Europe, but that area doesn't even have a manned space program. Careful comparison between stereotypical Nordics and existing populations shows a good match with the Slavic people. Eastern Europeans and Western Russians. Theosophists and anthroposophists both had occult reasons to believe that Slavs would birth the next evolution of mankind, that they were a golden mean between East and West in terms of culture, wisdom, and of course genetics. Certainly the Volksgeist of the Slavs is one conducive for that role, as even the Soviets were especially open to investigating the enhancement of psychic powers and achieving manipulation of time and space. Some of the brightest papers on fringe science have come out of Russia. There are several synchronistic oddities surrounding the Russian people, their language and history, to suggest some degree of involvement in time travel, or manipulation by time travelers. Additionally, areas where Russia has built underground bases capable of surviving global cataclysms are also the regions where the Proto-Indo-Europeans emerged out of nowhere many thousands of years ago and seeded cultures across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Transtemporal meta-civilization. In all likelihood, Nordics consist of different groups with different histories. Some could be time travelers from our future, others remnants of an ancient off-planetary superhuman civilization. Both share fourth density characteristics, both possess demiurgic technology, and both seem genetically related. After time travel paradoxes, timeline dynamics, and other complications settle out, what's left is a transcendent civilization whose cultures are distributed over spatial and temporal geography, cultures that mingle and tussle with each other across space and time. This civilization stands outside linear time. To us they would seem like time travelers from the future, beings from parallel timelines, travelers from other star systems, and ancient genetic manipulators all the same. Since these are just different aspects of a common meta-civilization that has simultaneously inserted various extensions of itself into opportune locations along our linear timeline. Negative Nordics. Perhaps the best-kept secret among alien disinformers is the existence of hostile Nordic factions. We hear plenty about reptilians and their ubiquitous grey underlings, but the common perception of Nordics is overwhelmingly positive. This is unfortunate because, as explained in Discerning Alien Disinformation, negative or cloned, imposter Nordics will be the first to initiate open contact with humanity, largely due to the psychological advantage offered by an appearance that is pleasing and familiar to humans, and because they may have the greatest vested interest in doing so. Recall what Four was told regarding such a scenario. Human-like beings were either slaves who would talk very little or genuine people of hers, and others who looked like humans who had an agenda to control humanity and stop its progress. She said the others were itching to stop our progress because at a certain point we would be acknowledgeable as independent beings. She said on her world about 60% of her kind thought of humankind as an experiment to be observed but generally do not care one way or the other. Roughly 30% constitute that others mentality. While she said, the minority constitute her point of view 14%. If this is accurate, then almost a third of that civilization could be classified as negative Nordics. In another post, Ford's advisor mentioned Nordic genetic engineering projects that went awry. She explained that in the past, where she came from, scientists had created artificial bodies that were capable of carrying a spiritual essence or artificial intelligence, but she said the history of the project showed that when someone's limitations were lifted, that the consciousness and personality of a person begins to warp out of control. She said some of the people within the design started to not carry themselves the same and started to act abnormally. She said the lack of limitations causes the personality of a person to, hard to put, become unstable. She said some became arrogant and some didn't see limits to their interactions. While she also said corrections were made to prevent this, it highlights a pattern of arrogance and psychopathy in superhumans who revel in their superiority. The pattern is reminiscent of the Lucifer rebellion myth, where 1/3 of the angels grew arrogant and refused to serve mankind. Even if only on a symbolic level, negative Nordics can be equated with the so-called fallen angels of biblical myth. The pattern is also reminiscent of the Nazi master race program that attempted to reconstruct the original antediluvian Nordic people, complete with their occult powers and mastery of space-time. There is no better modern example of negative Nordic alien mindset and influence than the Nazis. Why were they so obsessed with blonde-haired, blue-eyed, cold-hearted superhumans? Why did they want to turn humanity into these technologically advanced super-Aryans? There is an interesting anecdote suggesting Hitler himself was a contactee of negative Nordics. Hitler was talking one day to Orsic, the governor of Danzig, about the problem of a mutation of the human race. Orsic, not possessing the key to such strange preoccupations, interpreted Hitler's remarks in terms of a stock breeder interested in the amelioration of German blood. But all you can do, he replied, is to assist nature and shorten the road to be followed. It is nature herself who must create for you a new species. Up till now the breeder has only rarely succeeded in developing mutations in animals, that is to say, creating himself new characteristics. The new man is living amongst us now. He is here!" exclaimed Hitler, triumphantly. "Isn't that enough for you? I will tell you a secret. I have seen the new man. He is intrepid and cruel. I was afraid of him." In uttering these words, added Orsic, Hitler was trembling in a kind of ecstasy. It was Orsic, too, who related the following strange episode, about which Dr. Killy Delmas, a specialist in applied psychology, questioned him in vain. It is true that in a case like this psychology does not apply. A person close to Hitler told me that he wakes up in the night screaming and in convulsions. He calls for help, and appears to be half paralyzed. He is seized with a panic that makes him tremble until the bed shakes. He utters confused and unintelligible sounds, gasping, as if on the point of suffocation. The same person described to me one of these fits, with details that I would refuse to believe had I not complete confidence in my informant. Hitler was standing up in his room, swaying and looking all round him as if he were lost. It's he, he groaned, "He's come for me." His lips were white, he was sweating profusely. Suddenly he uttered a string of meaningless figures, then words and scraps of sentences. It was terrifying. He used strange expressions strung together in bizarre disorder. Then he relapsed again into silence, but his lips still continued to move. He was then given a friction and something to drink. Then suddenly he screamed. There! There! Over in the corner! He is there, all the time stamping with his feet and shouting. To quieten him he was assured that nothing extraordinary had happened, and finally he gradually calmed down. After that he slept for a long time and became normal again. Readers may be familiar with the Thule and Vril Society, the occult forerunners and influencers of the Nazi movement. Activities included communicating with beings from Aldebaran, building advanced technology according to the guidance they received, and promoting supremacy of the Aryan or Nordic race. The Vril ladies were also unusual. Unlike all other totalitarian bodies of history, Nazis stood not on the human ground of political theory or religious dogma, but on the alien ground of occult dynamics and demiurgic technology. The Nazi flag is a good example. Its black, white, and red colors growing outward symbolize the black, white, and red stages involved in the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. The black swastika itself symbolizes the black sun, which is none other than the corrupted demiurge. The latter goes by another name in occultism, the dead head, meaning dead logos, represented as the skull and crossbones by the Templar Navy and Nazi SS. It is the central cosmic power source of all demiurgic technology, the demiurge itself. It represents the ultimate power, at least within the physical domain, and as Persephone commented in Matrix Reloaded, what men with power want is more power. As mentioned, there is antagonism among Nordic alien factions, and now it should be clear that some are quite arrogant, fascist, and psychopathic. In the Grail lore, there were those who protected the Grail, and those who were its enemies seeking to usurp it. We must keep this in mind should Nordic aliens show themselves to the world one day. Off-planetary ancestry. Finally, let's examine portions of the Nordic meta-civilization located in our distant past. Several sources link them to a planet once located between Mars and Jupiter. We read from various sources that approximately 50,000 years ago a certain planetary body in our own solar system was mysteriously destroyed. This body has been called Tiamat, Phaeton, Lucifer, Marduk, Maldek, Rahab, and even Luna, not connected to the name later given to the Moon. It was believed to have existed between Mars and Jupiter and was referred to as the second sun and may have been mistaken as such, because its atmosphere was resplendent with reflections of the actual sun. This is not as improbable as it sounds since Venus, the morning star, the second planet from the sun and the third brightest object in the sky, is so bright that it casts a distinct shadow on a moonless night. Around the time of this event, the solar system, and later the Earth, was colonized by extraterrestrial beings who were either attracted to this solar system by that conflagration or upon coming here caused the calamity themselves. Whether the disaster was natural or not, the result was that mankind on Earth experienced total and long-lasting chaos and confusion. The surface of the planet Tiamat consisted mostly of great oceans. Upon its destruction, these vast saline waters entered into the Earth's atmosphere, causing the first of two massive prehistoric deluges and tribulations that mankind would experience. It is thought that the alien invaders took full advantage of this predicament and moved in to bring about colonization. They met no resistance from the disoriented and weakened inhabitants of the Earth who believed their visitors were powerful gods. Some theorists, like the energetic Eric von Daniken, have also determined that there was a great intergalactic war between two, or possibly more, extraterrestrial forces in a neighboring galaxy or solar system. The result of this titanic war had enormous consequences for the Earth because, it is postulated, the losers on being pursued into our system pretended to take refuge on Tiamat. They even erected a makeshift radar-type station there to decoy their pursuers. However, the defeated ones had really taken refuge on planet Earth, not on Tiamat. Upon their arrival, they almost immediately went underground into existing caverns that through scans of the planet they knew existed. They also descended into other caverns that they themselves cut out of the living rock. There were at least 5 entire continents on Earth in primeval times called Appalachia, Tyrrhenia, Byrrhenia, Fenniscandia, and Oceania. Our present continents are remnants of these. Beneath them were literally thousands of miles of subterranean passages, caverns, and refuges. Some of these remain today and experts know that many of them were not made naturally.
Many of our quaint myths and tales, like those of dwarves, trolls, elves, the little people and the Scandinavian king under the mountain, for example, concern these subterranean worlds. Almost all the Native American Indian tribes speak of their original residence beneath the surface of the earth. The pursuers, the victors of the war in the heavens, erroneously thinking that their enemies were on Tiamat, utterly annihilated it. A similar story was given to Orfeo Angelucci. Time is a dimension, as your scientists now correctly surmise. But it is only a dimension when applied to the various densities of matter. In the absolute, or non-material states of consciousness, time is non-existent. So let us say that in one of the time frames or dimensions, there was once a planet in the solar system of Earth, called Lucifer. It was of the least material density of any of the planets. Its orbit lay between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Among the etheric beings, or heavenly hosts, it was called the morning star. Among all planets it was the most radiant planet in the universe. The name of the prince of this shining planet was also Lucifer, a beloved son of God. Earth's legends about Lucifer and his hosts are true. Pride and arrogance grew in the heart of Lucifer and in the hearts of many Luciferians. They discovered all of the secrets of matter and also the great secret of the creative word. Eventually they sought to turn this omnipotent force against their brothers who were less selfish. Also against the etheric beings and the Father, or Source, for it became their desire to rule the universe. You know the rest of the legend, how Lucifer and his followers were cast down from their high estate. In simpler words, the Luciferians who were embodied then in the most attenuated manifestation of matter fell into embodiments in one of the most dense material evolutions, which is the animalistic evolution of Earth. We were among those who did not join the Luciferians in their revolt against the etheric hosts. Thus, although the Luciferians shattered our radiant planet in the holocaust of their war, we entered the etheric, non-material worlds in the higher octaves of light as liberated sons of God, while the Luciferian hosts fell into the dream of mind in matter upon the dark planet of sorrows. While our brothers are lost in the hell of unreality and turn their blinded, imploring eyes to the mute heavens, we can never forget them. We intercede unceasingly for your people's liberation. Thus today every bondsman upon earth has within himself the power through the mystery of the etheric Christ Spirit to cancel his captivity. Eventually all of mankind, deep drowned in time and matter, will surface to reality when they recognize their basic unity of being. When man is for man honestly and sincerely and not selfishly arrayed against himself, the hour of deliverance from the underworld will be close at hand. We wait now beyond the great, sad river of time and sorrows with open arms and hearts to receive among us our lost and prodigal brothers in that great day when they rejoin us as liberated sons of God. Another source, the Cassiopeian transcripts, also conveys the same basic story. According to the transcripts, approximately 8,000 years ago a planet named Kank existed between Mars and Jupiter. Its inhabitants were fourth-density superhuman Nordics who were polarized into two opposing factions. They possessed the equivalent of demiurgic technology and deployed it in their war. The result was irreversible destabilization of the planet and its subsequent shattering. A portion of the civilization was evacuated to Earth, and they brought with them one or several devices equivalent to the Grail stone, termed DARMs, trans-dimensional atomic remolecularizers, in the transcripts. On Earth, they encountered the relatively more primitive and swarthy Atlantean natives, who were forced to coexist with the newcomers. Thus Atlantis remained, until later widespread abuse of demiurgic technology once again destabilized the planet and, along with various cometary disasters, ended that civilization in a pole shift. Numerous cataclysms happened in the millennia to follow, each one further scattering and evolving the remaining survivors. In essence, these sources suggest that a portion of the Nordic civilization fell into the physical domain of Earth and submerged directly into its history and gene pool. In essence, they became human. Genetic and cultural legacy on Earth. The implication is that white people are their most direct descendants, and are therefore the most off-planetary of the human races, although portions of those same genetics can be found in other races due to mixing over the millennia. As many have observed, the proclivity of Western culture for exploiting and ruining the environment makes sense if whites are not even from this planet. Likewise with their affinity for scientific innovation and its use for war, and an imperialistic drive to dominate lesser cultures. A close scrutiny of the anomalies in the supposed evolutionary history of the white race shows they could not have descended from Africans adapting to colder climates. In any case, the point is that after the fall of Atlantis and subsequent cataclysms, the earthbound descendants of Nordic immigrants resettled in other areas of the globe. One portion seems to have settled in western Russia near Turkey, and they are now known as the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Another settled somewhere in the northern Atlantic, and a smaller fragment took root in the Pyrenees. As a matter of speculation, in time, they developed into the Hyperboreans, Indo-Aryans of India, Indo-Europeans of Europe, and the Indo-Iranians, which went on to seed further cultures like the Sumerians, Egyptians, Dravidians, Celts, Persians, and so on. Locations include Iceland, probably Hyperborea, and the source for Plato's given dimensions of Atlantis, Turkey, India, Egypt, Spain, Malta, Canary Islands, Ireland, and Scotland, Central America, and later archaic Greece, Phoenicia, northern Japan, and lastly Easter Island. Megalithic technology was their signature. According to researcher Jim Allison, the sacred sites they left behind form a great circle on the globe whose northern pole lies in western Alaska, close to where Charles Hapgood determined the previous geographic North Pole existed 8,000 years ago. That doesn't indicate when the sites were built, only that the builders desired to encode the old North Pole in the distribution of their post-pole shift structures. For example, Easter Island is on this circle, but it wasn't colonized until roughly 500 CE by tall red-haired whites, probably from northern Scotland. Each of these cultures had close ties with their transcendent Nordic counterparts, for instance, the mysterious Tuatha-De-Danann, a technologically advanced race of fair-haired people who fled to Ireland after the destruction of their homeland, likely Iceland, though some propose they were a tribe of Israel. Eventually made their exit from Irish history by joining the Sea underground, who were a transcendent race of godlike beings and, like the Sylphs, could have been their unfallen, non-devolved, Nordic alien counterparts. As detailed by Frank Joseph in his book Survivors of Atlantis, the Nordic diaspora also built the Great Pyramid and installed the Grail stone therein, founded pre-dynastic Egypt, and seeded the Mesoamerican civilizations. Their standard procedure was to command a large native populations using only a small number of their own, which is easy enough to do with advanced technology and knowledge. For instance, in India they were the earliest Brahmin kings. In China, they were the demigods known as the Three Sovereigns who, according to Chinese mythology, used their magical powers to improve the lives of their people. In Egypt, they were progenitors of the pharaonic dynasties. In Mesoamerica, they became the basis of the Quetzalcoatl myth and established the Mayan calendars. Every culture they founded was impressed with the same proto-myth, which encoded the situation regarding the nature of our reality, how this timeline came to be, and where it's all going. These myths encode the cosmological war between the corrupted demiurge and the Logos, the off-planetary history of the ancient Nordic civilization, the true role of demiurgic technology, and the cataclysms that accompanied its abuse. This same stream of Gnostic revelation is repeated in certain works of fiction today, films, books, and television series, which are the modern equivalent of myths, consciously or subconsciously inspired by the same forces. In the next article, I will explore the unified Gnostic picture encoded in these ancient and modern myths. I'm now much closer to the complexities involved in the UFO field and the government involvement. There's certainly a serious threat by some visiting UFOs and further problems caused by alien visitors who are integrated into our society, possibly holding high positions in government. These aliens, who look like us, are here for unknown reasons, and this is causing many problems for those trying to find them. There's very little doubt they've been here for many years, and they have occasionally had meetings with certain very high-ranking people.
One very high-ranking military officer wrote about one such meeting. These meetings are far and few between, and the individual is chosen by the alien for such meetings, which take place under extreme secrecy. These aliens operate above normal government knowledge, and they are pursued by highly trained hunter-killers of several nationalities who operate to eliminate them. Normal people getting close to the truth of what is happening are getting into very dangerous areas and will quickly have a fatal accident. They will not permit anybody to rock the boat. I was warned I would be killed because of some of my work. The aliens are highly intelligent and have possibly obtained positions at a very high level, and this is of great concern to senior authorities. My information is that the only way they can be recognized is by a deformed finger on one of their hands. To hide this, they usually wear gloves or a bandage on the finger as if they have had an injury. The fact that they look like us and mingle amongst us secretly begs the questions: why are they here and what are their intentions? Why are they so secretive? There are people in very high places who consider them a threat and have squads out looking for them with intent to kill. This is no doubt why they stay secret. The truth is that we fear what we don't understand. It's not known what their true form is. The deformed finger strongly suggests that do not look like us in their true form. Either way, they're obviously highly intelligent and far ahead of us technically. It is not known their planet of origin. Or if they are time travelers, they've never disclosed this as far as we know. Are there any well-known public figures, anywhere in the world, who you suspect or are suspected to be non-human? I don't know. If it became known that there was one such person, he would certainly disappear in very quick time. The authorities would immediately subject him to interrogation in an effort to find out how many of them were here and what their intentions were. This is why they remain secret. But once again, we must question what they're here for and what their intentions are. Always remember, throughout the course of history, a more advanced race has always enslaved a lesser advanced race. This is what worries the authorities. I propose that at least some of the accounts of alien visitation can be attributed to a humanoid species indigenous to Earth, a sister race that has adapted to our numerical superiority by developing a surprisingly robust technology. The explicitly reproductive overtones that color many encounters suggests that these indigenous aliens are imperiled by a malady that has gone uncured throughout the eons we have coexisted. Driven by a puzzling mixture of hubris and existential desperation, they seek to perpetuate themselves by infusing their gene pool with human DNA. While existing at the very margins of ordinary human perception, they have succeeded in realms practically unexplored by known terrestrial science, reinventing themselves at will and helping to orchestrate a misinformation campaign of awe-inspiring scope. We typically assume interdimensional travel must involve arcane cosmological machinery such as a wormhole or Stargate. But I became increasingly drawn to the idea that our visitors' method of travel is less flashy, from a technical perspective, and more understandable in terms of earthly, if bizarre, paranormal influences. This leads to my growing suspicion that the aliens typically attributed to extrasolar planets are less advanced than they lead us to believe. In fact, I think a case can be made that we're dealing a surprisingly vulnerable intelligence that relies largely on subterfuge and disinformation to achieve its goals, a theme I attempt to address in later chapters. And as outlandish as it may seem, I've been forced to wrestle with the notion that our relationship with these others is far more widespread and intimate than even paranoid dramatizations of the UFO spectacle would have us believe. These dawning suspicions are borne out, at least in part, by world folklore, with its preoccupation with little people in our midst, as well as by recent discoveries that suggest the history of our species is more enigmatic than we'd like to admit. We may well share our planet with crypto-hominids that have mastered the art of camouflage in order to coexist with us. More portentously, their agenda might be within our ability to grasp. But to do so, we must suspend the assumption that we're dealing with something as quaint as ET astronauts. Given reports of humanoid beings materializing and disappearing, it's tempting to speculate that our visitors have mastered a technology of consciousness, able to manipulate their own wave functions and skip back and forth between multiple universes at the speed of thought. This is one, admittedly colorful, explanation for the lack of physical evidence. They might lurk in hyperspace as well as familiar, 3D space-time. Moreover, this form of travel might be accomplished without the need for energy-intensive machinery. If schematic experiences are any indication, the ability to transcend space and time might be a more fitting subject for parapsychologists than theoretical physicists. Also intriguing are accounts of tulpas, which are either objects or human-like entities crafted by pure thought, according to certain esoteric Buddhist beliefs. Capable of carrying out tasks on behalf of their creators, tulpas aren't unlike the maddeningly transient occupants seen in or around spacecraft, sometimes digging for soil specimens in an almost parodic reenactment of the Apollo moon landings. While a more conventional flesh and blood explanation remains my central proposal, we would be timid to avoid addressing the UFO phenomenon's parapsychological aspects. I find it likely that an indigenous population of aliens would have experimented along occult lines out of sheer need for secrecy. A nuts and bolts technology can go a long way toward ensuring anonymity in the face of an intrusive human civilization. But the ability to directly influence the fabric of mind itself would be even more effective and perhaps less resource-intensive. Like John Keel and Jacques Vale, McTagg saw the idea of aliens being curious visitors from the stars as deliberate subterfuge. These authors explain why aliens have fronted lies about their true nature and origins. My book Discerning Alien Disinformation also addresses that issue. But does the bogus of the extraterrestrial hypothesis mean they are instead native to Earth? Well, the line between indigenous and extraterrestrial is blurred if the latter have existed on Earth for longer than we have, even if they once originated from elsewhere in space and time. Maybe the deception isn't so much about whether they are extraterrestrial, but about the extent of their entrenchment in our activities, that far from being merely visited, humanity has been influenced by alien intelligences since the very beginning. By portraying themselves as recent visitors, the depth and scope of their manipulation remains hidden. Contrary to what TAI suspects, their technology is more advanced than they are letting on. Aliens seem to hide their secret science behind a veil of plausibility made of more primitive but trendy concepts and imagery borrowed from human culture. In truth, not only are aliens telepathic and able to induce hallucinatory camouflage, but they have the technology to parallel their psychic prowess. This demiurgic technology operates via metaphysical laws as much as physical ones, and seems paranormal only because it extends beyond human materialistic science into the realm of the occult, the latter simply being a science that makes use of etheric, astral, and conscious energies and principles. If the crypto-omnids seem closer to fairies and elves who use magic instead of aliens who use science, it's because demiurgic technology appears like magic to those who don't understand it, and superhumans seem like supernatural spirits to those who assume aliens are as deeply mired in three-dimensional physicality as we are. We should avoid the mistake made by proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, EDH, and ultraterrestrial hypothesis, UTH, and not fall into the false dichotomy of physical versus non-physical, because the solution to the riddle is that these beings live in amphibious existence between these extremes. More information on subversive humanoid alien groups comes from an anonymous. The first recall starts in early 1955, late February or early March. It is still cold in the Connecticut town where I was approaching my 3rd birthday. I am sitting on the edge of the bed. There was a pulsating green glow coming in through the window of my bedroom. Everything was silent. I mean completely silent. I hear footsteps up the back steps and the back door open. I wasn't frightened. In fact, I was very calm, almost detached. The footsteps approach my room and the door opens. Enter a blonde-haired man and woman. They are wearing a one-piece suit that reminds me of my pajamas with the feet built into them. The color is a dull silver. To my child mind, I think they are pajamas. They look about the size of my parents. The woman is somewhat smaller than the man. They are standing there looking at me and I am sitting on the bed looking at them. They approached no closer than 3 feet. When they first come in they said, "Hello," and they knew my name. They were talking like the New England people with the accent. That is what I was used to hearing. I don't know these people but they seem to know me. I asked them, "Who are you?" And the man says, "We are your friends." I tell them I don't know them. And the woman says, "You don't remember us, but one day you will." It seems that the woman did most of the speaking. The following is quoted from the hypnosis session transcript. The woman says that they have come to visit and they will visit from time to time to help me learn big things. It seems that they are talking in words that are understandable to my 3-year-old consciousness. So they are being fairly basic. They say that they are here now because I have reached the triad age, that the age of 3 is significant for our type and that multiples of 3 have significant meaning. They're not saying significant, they are saying, holding up 3 fingers and saying that, this many is important. That it's an important number to remember. I asked, why? They say they can't tell me yet but that they are my friends and that we have been friends for a long time. They say that it is time for them to leave, that they wanted to visit and say, hello, and it is time for me to go back to sleep. They tell me not to look at the light outside.
So I lay back down and cover up. And, the man leading the way, they turn around and open the door and walk out closing the door behind them. I hear them walk out the back door. I don't go to sleep immediately. I hear kind of a hum and a bright green light momentarily shines through the window. Then it stops and it is dark again except for a dim street light. I got sleepy and went to sleep. By this time, it was late 1956 or early 1957. It was cold outside. I received the beep signal and my consciousness activated. I dressed myself in blue jeans, long sleeve shirt, and my Buster Brown shoes. I went out the back and down the alley as the house had no backyard, it had a side yard. In the side yard was a ship sitting on 3 pads. It was pulsating orange. The man and woman were there standing out away from the ship with a ramp descending to the ground. There was a whitish yellow light coming out of the doorway or opening at the top of the ramp. They indicated that they wanted to take me somewhere. I asked where and they said that they wanted me to meet some people. This seemed alright with me, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. We walked over to the saucer, walked up the ramp and entered. The ramp then retracted and then blended with the side of the ship. There were 4 aliens in the ship. 2 woman pilots, the man and the woman. They were all dressed in one-piece gray suits with integrated boots. The extraterrestrial craft was flying over an area that reminds me of the Smoky Mountains today. Soon the craft was flying over a big V-type valley. One giant hill on one side and one giant steep hill on the other side. From the air, it looked like it went down into a big V. Then the ship stopped in midair. In the console viewer was a 90-degree rock cliff. One of the ship's operators sent some sort of signal. They pushed a sequence of buttons. In the upper left-hand screen of the console monitor, a window popped up. Then, on the side of the steep, rocky cliff, a black hole appeared. It didn't look like a hole to me on the monitor, rather it looked like a large black spot. Before the signal was sent, there was terrain. From the air, this black spot looked oval with the elongated part of the oval being towards the top of the hill. The ship started descending and they turned the floor view off. But I could see on the console monitor that they lined up with this black spot and traveled into it. What a surprise! This black spot was the strangest thing I have ever seen. Even with current-day recall, I have never seen anything like it. The only way I can describe it is like jet black light. If you take a spotlight and shine it on a surface, you have a white beam with a white spot. Make that a black beam with a black spot and it describes what it looked like. It is hard to describe, but what it was and what it led to was even more difficult to explain. This black beam created an opening through solid rock. It was of tremendous size because the 25 diameter ship was dwarfed by the opening. I watched the flat panel console monitor, obviously not an invention in 1956, as the ship entered the black spot. It was dark briefly, like going through ink. Then from the center of the monitor out, an imagery emerged, opening out until there was a panoramic view. What a view! We were inside a huge, and I mean huge, circular room with flying saucers of every size and configuration parked in various places. There were ships much larger than the one we were in, and there were some smaller ones as well. The only analogy I can draw is an airport, or I guess you would call it a spaceport. The room was cylinder-shaped. The walls, floor and ceiling had a shiny black, glass-like surface that had a faint orange glow to it. There were no sharp angles anywhere. It was the same in the flying saucer. Where surfaces met, it was rounded. This giant room was the same way. The ship maneuvered through spaces between the parked ships and ultimately landed. The door opened. It was weird how that door worked, because it seemed to not be there 1 minute and the next, it just materialized. This was the first time I had ever been to this place, although it appeared that the other passengers had been there before. Everyone, including myself, stood up except for the pilots. I knew I was supposed to stand up but didn't know why. There appeared to be routine to the other passengers. There were several people, 3 men actually, waiting outside for us. The man and the woman extraterrestrials stuck by me and the other kid, I suppose to assist us since we were rather small. So we walked down the ramp. I was a little curious about everything there. Because, well, the room was gigantic. It was huge. There was all different types of ships parked there. I could see some that were exact duplicates of the one we arrived in. Then there were other ones too, different sizes and configurations. My child mind was curious about all this. But no one was really talking at this point. One of the 3 men seemed to be the spokesperson, and he said, "Welcome. Let us go to the meeting room." Before I continue the narrative of this extraterrestrial contact experience, it is necessary to discuss an unusual but real phenomena that occurs around this group of ETs. This is the phenomena of consciousness expansion. This was not explained to me until 1991, when it became necessary to understand why missing time occurs and also why contact experiences with extraterrestrials of any species are difficult to remember. The life energy field of the least developed extraterrestrial civilization is significantly greater than that of a human. Human beings, like all life forms in this galaxy, are electromagnetic in nature. If you consider the brain, and its corresponding consciousness as a light bulb on an adjustable dimmer control, it will be easier to understand the phenomena. Under ordinary circumstances, the typical human is at the lowest setting, rather dim compared to ETs. However, the potential for more exists. Some individuals have higher settings with corresponding talents that primitive human science labels as phony or, if being charitable, extrasensory perception. The extraterrestrials, on the other hand, have their dimmer switch turned way up all the time. They perceive at what they call a tri-level. For humans with a philosophic or theosophical orientation, that translates to the etheric, astral and mental planes of reality. The ETs have a 360-degree field of conscious perception that is spherical in nature. The only analogy I can make about it is that they are aware of everything at once, constantly. When a human gets around an extraterrestrial, the enhanced energy, electromagnetic field of the ET has the impact of turning up the human's dimmer so that the consciousness is brighter. This pushes the individual's conscious into areas that normally are relegated to the subconscious. This produces a duality effect. The person is themselves, but they are more. I won't digress into the sorts of things that are stored in every individual's subconscious. I will say that the normal individual is incomplete without access to this information.
Being around an extraterrestrial brings out this completeness, and the extraterrestrials respond to the total individual, not the limited view of self that everyone sees in the mirror. It is necessary to understand this in order to understand what happened when this group of human passengers finally reached the meeting room. To understand how 2 4-year-old kids were functionally equal to 2 teenagers and a young adult. An important but lesser-known contactee is Orfeo Angelucci. His encounters also took place in Los Angeles in the 1950s. About a mile further along, the disc swerved to the right, away from the road, and hung motionless over an unfenced field some distance below the road level. I drove off the pavement about 30 feet to the edge of the declivity. From there the glowing red disc was directly in front of me and only a short distance away. As I watched it in bewilderment, it pulsated violently, then shot off into the sky at a 30 or 40 degree angle and at very great speed. High in the sky to the west it decelerated abruptly, hung for a moment, then accelerated and disappeared like a meteor. But just before the glowing red orb vanished, 2 smaller objects came from it. These objects were definitely circular in shape and of a soft, fluorescent green color. They streaked down directly in front of my car and hovered only a few feet away. I judged each to be about 3 feet in diameter. Hanging silently in the air like iridescent bubbles, their green light fluctuated rhythmically in intensity. Then, apparently coming from between those 2 airy balls of green fire, I heard a masculine voice in strong, well-modulated tones and speaking perfect English. Because of the nervous tension I was under at that moment, amounting almost to a state of shock, it is impossible for me to give a verbatim account of the conversation which followed. The invisible speaker obviously was endeavoring to choose words and phrases which I could understand, but there were several things which even now are not clear to me. I can only make a poor approximation of the gist of his words. I do, however, remember the first words spoken, which were, "Don't be afraid, Orfeo, we are friends." Then the voice requested that I get out of my car and come out here. Mechanically, I pushed open the car door and got out. I didn't feel fear, but I was so weak and shaky that I could scarcely stand. I leaned against the front fender of my car and looked at the twin pulsating circular objects hovering a short distance in front of me. The glowing discs created a soft illumination, but I could see no person anywhere. I remember vaguely that the voice spoke again, calling me by my full name in words of greeting. It further stated that the small green discs were instruments of transmission and reception comparable to nothing developed on Earth. Then the voice added that through the discs I was in direct communication with friends from another world. There was a pause and I dimly remember thinking that I should say something, but I was stunned into utter silence. I could only stare in fascination at those fantastic balls of green fire and wonder if I had lost my mind. When the voice spoke again I heard these startling words, "Do you remember your 18 balloons and the mold cultures that you lost in the skies back in New Jersey, Orfeo?" I was astounded to hear the strange voice recalling an incident out of the past which had happened so long ago that I had almost forgotten it. "Yes. Yes, sir, I do." "Do you also remember the strange, wingless craft that appeared to be observing your activities?" Suddenly the entire scene came back to me crystal clear in memory. I remember Mabel, my wife, my father-in-law and our friends and neighbors with me as we stared at that strange, disc-shaped object in the sky. I recalled how the object had appeared to follow the balloons bearing my precious cultures of Aspergillus clavatus mold. I had been quite an experimenter in those days. It was then it dawned upon me that the fluorescent discs were similar in shape and behaved in the same erratic manner as had that mysterious craft back in New Jersey. The only difference was that I had seen the craft in daylight when it glistened like metal, whereas the discs glowed in the darkness. "You do remember us, Orfeo," the golden voice stated. "We were observing your efforts that day as we have watched you since then." Like with Maxwell, these beings employed the very direct and personal "do you remember" method to quickly prove their superhuman awareness about those whom they address. Due to their monitoring and telepathic abilities, they may come across as omniscient. The twin discs were spaced about 3 feet apart. Now the area between them began to glow with a soft green light which gradually formed into a luminous three-dimensional screen as the discs themselves faded perceptibly. Within the luminous screen there appeared images of the heads and shoulders of two persons, as though in a cinema close-up. One was the image of a man and the other of a woman. I say man and woman only because their outlines and features were generally similar to men and women. But those two figures struck me as being the ultimate of perfection. There was an impressive nobility about them, their eyes were larger and much more expressive and they emanated a seeming radiance that filled me with wonder. Even more confusing was the troubling thought somewhere in the back of my mind that they were oddly familiar. Strangely enough, the projected images of the two beings appeared to be observing me. For they looked directly at me and smiled. Then their eyes looked about as though taking in the entire scene. I had the uncomfortable feeling as they studied me that they knew every thought in my mind. Everything I'd ever done and a vast amount about me that I didn't even know myself. Intuitively, I sensed that I stood in a kind of spiritual nakedness before them. Also, I seemed to be in telepathic communication with them, for thoughts, understandings and new comprehensions that would have required hours of conversation to transmit, flashed through my consciousness. Before those two incredible beings I felt that I was only a shadow of the shining reality I sensed them to be. It is difficult to express my feelings in words, for my understanding of them through intuitive perception. The large eyes, notable physiognomy and physique, peculiar radiance, and telepathic intensity are details that didn't become generally accepted in alienology regarding these alien types until decades later. In a subsequent incident, Angelucci goes further into their appearance and nature. As I cut across the vacant lots, the Hyperion Avenue freeway bridge loomed huge and dark ahead of me. The sky was overcast and the dense, oblique shadows from the vast concrete structure were heavier and more eerie than usual. Yet in the shadows of the dark archways of the bridge I had come to feel a kind of warmth and welcome, a spiritual communion with a vastly greater and more kindly world. For it was in the shadows of the huge bridge that I had come upon the saucer which had carried me out of this world. I was thinking of these things when I suddenly became aware of someone approaching from out of the darkness. I was startled, for I'd never before met anyone taking the shortcut beneath the bridge so late at night.
I was about to call out a word of greeting when it dawned upon me that the stranger was coming from the dead end of the bridge. My first thought was that someone was lying in wait for me, possibly to rob me. But before I could become alarmed, I heard the stranger call, "Greetings, Orfeo." My heart almost stopped beating, for immediately I recognized the vibrant, beautiful voice of the being who had spoken to me in the saucer. I stopped in my tracks, utterly speechless, and stared at the approaching figure. But then a wave of joy and gratitude flooded over me, and I finally replied falteringly, "Greetings, to you." He laughed pleasantly. "I know that in your mind you have given me a name, I who have remained nameless to you," he said gently. "You may call me by that name, Orfeo, it is as good as any other and has more inner significance to you than any name I might give you." Neptune. I spoke the name slowly and reverently. For it was indeed the name I had given to this great and mysterious being. Then I added, "At last you have come to give me strength and faith." These beings conceal their real names and identities, that much is invariant. When pressed, they might give simple symbolic nicknames drawn from our mythology, planets, stars, and constellations to convey the gist of what they are about. Even on an individual level this might apply. For example, a female member might use the alias Andromeda if she is burdened by punitive limitations, just as Andromeda was chained to a stone in Greek mythology. He was near enough then for me to see that he was several inches taller than I and similar in outline to a well-built man. But the shadows were so heavy that I couldn't make out the details of his figure. But just to be in his presence once more was to sense again a tremendous uplifting wave of strength, harmony, joy and serenity. "Come, Orfeo," he said gently, continuing on past me. "We have many things to discuss tonight." I followed him as he strode ahead of me through the dense shadows. I could hear his solid footsteps upon the graveled path, which convinced me beyond the shadow of a doubt that he was no phantom or illusion. He led me to a better lighted area near the bend of Glendale Boulevard where it goes up and over the bridge. I was actually trembling in anticipation of my first actual look at the mysterious visitor from another world. When he turned, I saw his face, the same wonderful, expressive countenance I had seen on the luminous screen. I again noticed especially his extremely large, dark and expressive eyes, and nobility and beauty of his features, which actually seemed to radiate warmth and kindliness. Then I noticed that he was wearing a kind of uniform, bluish in color, perfectly tailored and tightly fitted to the outlines of his body. But it was apparently without seams, buttons, pockets, trimmings or design of any sort. In fact, it fitted so perfectly that it was almost like a part of his body. But as I studied him, I became aware of an astonishing phenomenon. I could see his uniform and figure clearly, but it wavered occasionally, as though I were viewing it through rippling water. And the color did not remain solid and uniform, but varied and changed in spots, which reminded me of an imperfectly tuned television set. Only his face and hands remained immobile and stable, as though not partially obscured by a film of rippling water. For a time he was silent, and I was acutely conscious of a tremendous vibrational field about him, a tangible emanation of serenity, brotherly love, and ineffable joy. At last he said, "You sense and understand intuitively many things I cannot say directly to you, Orfeo. You have just fully realized that we are not like Earthmen in that we function in dimensions unknown to your world. Earth is a three-dimensional world, and because of this it is preponderantly false. I may tell you that to the entities of certain other worlds Earth is regarded as the cursed planet, the home of the reprobate, fallen ones. Others call your Earth the home of sorrows. For Earth's evolution is evolution through pain, sorrow, sin, suffering and the illusion of physical death. Believe me, all evolutions are not similar to Earth's, despite the present beliefs of your scientists." As I heard these strange words, my heart and mind cried out, "But why must it be so? Why should Earth's people know pain, suffering and death?" But soon my attention was distracted once more as I saw the figure of Neptune strangely waver again. Suddenly the question was in my mind. Was he really there in the truest physical sense, or was he an immaterial projection into the physical world from another dimension? Did I see him in his true form in ordinary state of being, or merely a projected approximation of a man's appearance? These strange thoughts frightened me a little and carried me into too deep waters. A reassuring smile lighted his face. "Don't be alarmed, Orfeo. The answer to the troublesome question in your mind is both yes and no. On Earth form, color, individuality and the material aspect of things is all important. In our world these illusions are of practically no importance at all. Suffice to say that for you I am an approximation of myself as I really am. I can't make it any clearer in three-dimensional terms." Unlike the comic book Venusians of George Adamski, Angelucci's depiction more closely matches the findings of modern alienology, though that is not to say his books were free of embellishment or fictionalization, or that Angelucci wasn't duped by customized virtual reality scenarios projected into his mind by telepathic beings. Rather, what elements of truth can be sifted from his books were far ahead of their time, so far ahead that, because novel truth is never as exciting as science fiction, Angelucci never received the level of attention afforded to charlatans. This final excerpt further underscores the idea that human-like aliens walk among us undetected. It was around 6 o'clock and the streets heavy with traffic. Parking my car, I walked toward the bus terminal. It too was bustling with activity. In all of the excitement, flying saucers and space visitors were the farthest things from my mind. But as I entered the front door of the bus terminal I stopped in my tracks and stared, unable to believe my eyes. Directly in front of me and facing the newsstand was a familiar face. I knew I couldn't be mistaken, it was Neptune. He glanced up and his dark eyes told me that he was expecting me. He was dressed in an ordinary dark business suit and carried a briefcase under his arm. A dark blue felt hat with snap brim shaded his eyes. His intent gaze never left me. Stalling for time, I walked over to the newsstand and picked up a magazine and thumbed through it. I had received the definite telepathic impression not to approach him, thus I waited for him to speak to me. But he did not. Staring blankly at a page in the magazine, I waited for further telepathic communication. It came. The gist of the message was, "The last time you saw me, Orfeo, I was in a less objectified projection in your three-dimensional world. The purpose being to give you some idea of our true aspect. But now tonight you see me fully objectified. If you did not know who I am, you could not tell me from one of your fellows. Tonight I am no half-phantom, but can move among men as an earthman. It is not necessary for you to speak to me, you have gained the understanding. You know now that we can appear and function as human beings.